podcast was created as a supplemental learning resource for our cognitive psychology course. The content is based on course topics and readings from Essentials of Cognitive Psychology by Christopher Klein, along with instructor-developed explanations, examples, and pedagogical framing. AI tools were used to help transform course material into a conversational podcast format, including the use of AI-generated voices. The use of AI voice technology is intended to make the material more engaging, accessible, and flexible for students. However, the podcast should not replace careful reading of the textbook, reviewing course materials, or completing assigned activities. Any interpretations, examples, or explanations included in the podcast are provided for educational purposes and are the responsibility of the instructor. Students should rely on the assigned textbook, course lectures, and official course materials as the primary sources for exams, assignments, and class discussions.
So, if I tell you that all flowers are animals, right, and then I say that all animals can jump, does it make logical sense to conclude that a daisy can jump?
Gut reaction, you'd probably shake your head and think you've lost your mind.
Exactly.
Mhm.
But cognitive psychology says that, well, structurally anyway, that makes perfect sense. And understanding exactly why your brain violently wants to reject that idea, that might just be the key to saving your grade on your next exam.
It really is the perfect trap, isn't it? We are so incredibly biased by our own understanding of reality that we completely lose sight of the actual, underlying machinery of our thoughts.
Yeah, totally. So welcome to your deep dive. We have a very specific, highly targeted mission for you today. You are making your way through your undergraduate cognitive psychology course, and you've hit Chapter 10 of your Essentials of Cognitive Psychology textbook.
Right, and the focus today is entirely on reasoning and decision-making.
Which is huge, because up until this point in your studies, you've basically been looking at the foundation.
Right.
You've explored how a visual stimulus hits the retina,
Yeah.
or how your attention filters out the noise of a crowded room.
Yeah, or how your working memory manages to hold on to a two-factor verification code just long enough for you to type it into your phone.
Right. And all of that is fascinating, obviously. But it's mostly about input. It's about how we absorb the world around us.
Which, naturally leads to the ultimate question. What do we actually do with all of that absorbed information?
Exactly.
The brain doesn't just collect data for the sake of having this massive internal library. I mean, it collects data so that we can act, so we can survive, navigate complex environments, and choose between incredibly difficult alternatives.
So this is really where all those earlier chapters culminate. We are crossing the bridge from perceiving to acting.
Spot on.
And to really ground how this works in your everyday life, I want you to picture a scenario. This is right out of your course material. Think about a guy named Nut.
Good old Nut.
Right. So Nut lives in Germany, and it is a miserable, cold, just endlessly rainy summer day. He and his wife are staring out their window, watching these black crows hop around the soggy garden, and they just hit a breaking point.
As you do.
Yeah, they decide they are packing up and flying to Spain tomorrow just to escape the gloom.
A very understandable reaction to a terrible weather system, honestly.
Completely.
Yeah.
So Nut goes to his bedroom to pack his suitcase. He knows that Spain is generally warm in the summer, so he starts pulling shorts and T-shirts out of his drawer.
Makes sense.
Right. And while he's doing this, he realizes they don't have any bug spray for the trip. So his wife offers to run down to the local pharmacy to grab some.
Okay.
Nut glances out the window, sees it is still absolutely pouring, and he advises her to take an umbrella. Then he turns back to his open suitcase, mentally reviews what he's already packed, and grabs the rest of his outfits. Now, on the surface, this is the most boring, mundane story imaginable. Just a guy packing.
But under the hood, cognitively speaking, Nut is performing an absolute symphony of complex mental operations.
Oh, wow. Really?
Oh, yeah. Every single step of that mundane story involves what cognitive psychologists specifically define as reasoning.
Okay, so we need to be very careful with that term, right?
Right.
Because in casual conversation, I feel like we use reasoning as just a simple synonym for thinking.
We do, all the time. But in your coursework, reasoning is defined as a very specific cognitive act.
Okay, lay it on me.
It is the process of taking available information, which we call premises, and reaching a brand new conclusion through inference. The conclusion you reach has to go beyond the initial premises.
I want to make sure I'm totally clear on that difference. If I just Remember that my keys are on the kitchen counter. Is that reasoning?
No, that is simply memory retrieval. You
Yeah.
are just accessing stored information.
Gotcha.
Reasoning is generative. It creates something that wasn't explicitly there before. Think about Nut packing his shorts.
Right, okay.
He had a premise stored in his memory. Spain is warm.
Right.
He had another premise. When it's warm, I wear shorts. Now, he didn't just passively hold those two facts in his head.
He combined them to infer a necessary action. Therefore, I must put shorts in this suitcase right now.
Exactly. He generated a new directive based on the combination of facts.
Okay, that makes total sense. And today, we are going to tear that whole process apart to see how it works, right? We're going to explore the two massive pillars of human reasoning, deductive and inductive.
Yes, we'll start with the rigid mathematical rules of logic and then contrast that with the messy probability-based guessing we actually use to survive on a daily basis.
We'll examine the mental shortcuts your brain takes to save energy, the hilarious and sometimes frustrating ways those shortcuts backfire, and finally, how all of this internal processing forces you to make decisions.
But before we get into the weeds, I do want to throw out a quick reminder for you listening. We are here to bring this material to life, to explore the why and the how so that these concepts really lock into your memory.
Yeah, but this deep dive is a companion to your studies. It's not a replacement for actually doing the reading, reviewing the diagrams, and, well, doing the hard work of studying. Think of this as your audio study guide.
Exactly. And the best place to start that guide is with the strictest rules of the mind.
Let's say that.
If we want to understand how human reasoning operates and frequently fails, we have to start by understanding pure logic. We have to look at deductive reasoning.
Deductive reasoning. Just the phrase makes it sound like we're solving a crime.
It does have a very Sherlock Holmes quality to it, doesn't it?
It really does.
So the defining characteristic of deductive reasoning is its direction. You are moving top down.
Top down, okay.
Right. You start with broad general principles or rules, and you apply them down to a specific isolated case. If the general rules are true and your logical structure is sound, your specific conclusion is absolutely guaranteed.
And the vehicle we use to do this, the structure, is called a syllogism.
Yes, a syllogism.
Right, so it's essentially a structured argument, usually made up of two or more premises followed by a conclusion. Let's map nuts packing onto a classic categorical syllogism.
Okay, let's hear it.
Premise 1. If it is warm, one needs shorts. Premise 2. Spain is warm in the summer. Conclusion. Therefore, Nut needs shorts in Spain.
That is perfectly structured. Now, this is where the field of cognitive psychology splits its focus, and you will definitely need to know the difference between these two approaches for your exam.
Okay, highlight this in your notes.
When evaluating a syllogism like that, researchers can take the normative approach or the descriptive approach.
The normative approach, that's the ideal, right?
Yes, it comes from philosophy and mathematics. It prescribes how human beings should reason if we were perfectly logical machines following strict rules.
The fantasy of the perfectly rational human.
Exactly. It assumes we evaluate every argument without bias, without emotion, just pure calculation.
Right, but then there's the descriptive approach.
Which is what cognitive psychologists actually spend their time studying. This approach describes how human beings actually reason in the real world, complete with all our biases, our emotional blind spots, and, our tendency to jump to conclusions.
But to recognize when humans are messing up in the descriptive reality, we first have to know the normative rules we're breaking.
We do, and for deductive logic, those rules go all the way back to Aristotle.
Classic Aristotle.
He laid down the absolute first principle of the syllogism. He said, if your two premises are true and your structure is valid, the conclusion must logically be true.
Okay, so Aristotle gave us the foundation, and later mathematicians gave us ways to visualize it. Your text introduces a fantastic tool for this called Euler circles. That's E-U-L-E-R, and it's pronounced Euler.
Yes, not Euler.
I always wanted to pronounce it Euler when I first read it.
It's a very common instinct, but it's Euler.
Good to know.
So these circles are a graphical way to map out categorical syllogisms. And categorical just means the syllogism is placing things into distinct categories, usually using words like all, no, or some.
Okay, so paint a picture of these circles for me. How do they help prove that Nut needs shorts?
All right, imagine you have a giant whiteboard. You draw a massive circle on it, and you label that big circle places that are warm.
Got a big circle.
Now look at your second premise. Spain is warm in the summer. To represent that, you draw a smaller circle labeled Spain, and because Spain is warm, you must draw that small circle entirely inside the boundaries of the massive warm places circle.
Got it. Spain is physically swallowed up by the concept of warm places.
Precisely. Because the entire Spain circle is trapped inside the warm places circle, and the rule needing shorts applies to everything inside the big circle, you can visually confirm that Spain definitively inherits the rule.
Therefore, nut needs shorts. Okay, I track with that. It seems pretty straightforward.
It does.
But I want to throw a wrench into this, because this is where I see people get completely tangled up when they're being tested on this material.
Let's hear the wrench.
You just used the words true and valid. In casual conversation, if I say, that's a valid point, I usually mean that's a true point. We treat them as the exact same concept.
And in cognitive psychology, conflating those two words is a fatal error. Truth and validity are entirely different concepts.
So the way I finally wrap my head around this is by thinking of logic as a meat grinder.
Okay, a meat grinder. I'm intrigued.
Yeah. Imagine a heavy-duty industrial meat grinder clamped to a table. Validity is strictly about the mechanics of the grinder. Is it assembled correctly? Are the blades sharp? Are the gears turning smoothly?
Right.
If you drop something into the top funnel, does it get processed and pushed out the bottom? If the machine works flawlessly from start to finish, the process is valid.
I like where this is going.
But truth has absolutely nothing to do with the machine.
Yeah.
Truth is about the quality of the meat you're dropping into the funnel.
Ah, yes.
If you take a beautiful prime cut of steak, which represents true premises, and drop it into a valid meat grinder, you get an incredible burger out the other end. You get a true, logically sound conclusion.
Because the inputs were good and the machine was good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what happens if you take completely rotten, spoiled, diseased meat, meaning false premises, and you drop it into that exact same perfect, valid meat grinder?
Well, the gears still turn, the blades still chop, the machine works flawlessly, it does its job.
But what comes out the other end is a disgusting, toxic burger.
Exactly.
The process was 100% valid, but the conclusion is 100% false because the inputs were false.
That is an exceptional analogy, really. Validity only cares about the internal structure of the argument. It just asks, does the conclusion necessarily follow from the premises provided, regardless of whether those premises are actually true in the real world?
Which brings us right back to the jumping flowers I brought up at the very beginning of the show. Let's run the jumping flowers through the meat grinder.
Let's do it.
Premise 1. All flowers are animals.
Rotten meat. Factually false in the real world.
Premise 2. All animals can jump.
Also rotten meat. Factually false. Elephants, for example, cannot jump.
Right. Conclusion. Therefore, all flowers can jump. Now, if I throw this at you on a multiple choice test and ask, is this syllogism valid? What is your immediate gut reaction?
The immediate intuitive reaction for almost everyone is to yell no, because your brain knows that daisies don't jump. It feels deeply wrong.
But according to the meat grinder,
According to the meat grinder, the syllogism is completely, flawlessly valid.
which is wild to think about.
It is. Let's use the Euler circles again to prove it. Draw a massive circle labeled things that can jump. Your premise says all animals jump, so draw a circle labeled animals entirely inside the jumping circle.
Okay, animals are inside jumping things.
Right. Your other premise says all flowers are animals, so you must draw a tiny circle labeled flowers entirely inside the animal circle.
Oh, wow.
Visually, the flower circle is trapped inside the animal circle, which is trapped inside the jumping circle. The logic is unbreakable.
The structure is perfect.
Yeah.
The meat was just bad.
Exactly. And this tension between validity and truth exposes one of the most prominent flaws in human reasoning. It's what psychologists call the belief bias.
Oh, this is a big one. So if you're listening, pause for a second and think about this in the context of your own life. When you are scrolling through social media or watching a political debate or, I don't know, listening to a friend argue a point,
Yeah.
are you actually evaluating the structural validity of their argument? Or are you just looking at their final conclusion? And if you happen to agree with it, you automatically assume their underlying logic must be flawless.
It's a tough pill to swallow, but the descriptive reality of human cognition is that we are immensely susceptible to the belief bias.
We really are.
If an argument produces a conclusion that aligns with our pre-existing beliefs, or honestly just sounds plausible, we are highly likely to judge the entire logical pathway as valid. We completely ignore the actual structure of the argument.
It's like we see a tasty-looking burger and just assume the meat grinder was perfectly clean without ever inspecting it.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And conversely, if a perfectly valid argument leads to a conclusion we find unbelievable or offensive, we will stubbornly insist the logic is invalid.
Even if it's perfectly structured.
Right. Our belief in the truth of the content completely blinds us to the structural mechanics. Deductive logic requires an incredibly high cognitive load to suspend your beliefs and just look at the mechanics.
So categorical syllogisms categorizing all X or Y are tricky enough because of our biases, but that's only half the battle, right?
It is.
We also have to contend with what happens when conditions are attached. Let's look at conditional syllogisms. These are the classic if P then Q scenarios. And frankly, this is where human intuition really starts to fall apart.
It really does. Conditional logic is the absolute bedrock of scientific hypothesis testing, computer programming, mathematics. But despite its importance, our brains genuinely struggle with it.
So a conditional syllogism always has a condition, the if part, and a consequence, the then part.
Yes.
Let's bring Nut and his wife back into the picture to map this out. Nut tells his wife to take an umbrella. Let's establish our rule. If it is raining, my wife takes an umbrella.
Okay.
We need to assign variables to this to study it properly. The if part, it is raining, is our antecedent. We'll call that P. The then part, my wife takes an umbrella, is our consequent. We'll call that Q.
Perfect. So the rule is simply, if P, then Q. Now, logicians have identified 4 specific structures you can build out of a conditional statement. 2 of them are logically valid, and 2 of them are logically invalid.
Let's start with the valid ones, because they usually feel pretty intuitive.
They do. The first valid form is called modus ponens. It's a Latin term that translates roughly to the mode that affirms.
Modus ponens, mode that affirms.
Right. In this structure, you explicitly affirm that the antecedent P is true. The logic flows like this. If P, then QP is true. Therefore, Q must be true.
Okay, let's plug Nut's umbrella into that.
Hmm.
If it is raining, P, she takes an umbrella, Q. We look out the window, and it is indeed raining, so P is true. Therefore, she definitely takes the umbrella, Q is true. Okay, I have no problem with that. It's direct cause and effect.
It is the most straightforward logical step.
Okay,
Now, the second valid form is called modus tollens, the mode that denies. In this structure, instead of affirming the first part, you deny the second part. You deny the consequent.
okay, wait, walk me through that.
The logic is, if P then Q, Q is not true, therefore P is not true.
Okay, let me try plugging the umbrella into that. If it is raining, she takes an umbrella. I watch her walk out the door, and her hands are completely empty.
Right.
She is not taking an umbrella, so not Q.
Right.
Therefore, it must not be raining, not P.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that also tracks. If it were raining, the rule says she'd have the umbrella. Since she doesn't have it, the condition for her having it couldn't have been met. No rain.
Precisely. Modus ponens, affirming the first part, and modus tollens, denying the second part, are your 2 valid, structurally sound pathways. Now we enter the danger zone.
The invalid forms?
Yes. The third structure is invalid, and it is called denying the antecedent. The logic goes like this. If P, then QP is not true. Therefore, Q is not true.
Let me test this with the umbrella rule.
Huh.
If it is raining, she takes an umbrella. I look outside and the sun is shining. It is not raining.
Right.
Therefore, she does not take an umbrella.
Wait. I'm going to challenge you here. That makes total sense to me. Why would she take an umbrella if it's not raining? Why is that logically invalid?
It feels right, doesn't it? But you are making a massive hidden assumption.
I am.
Read the original rule very carefully. If it is raining, she takes an umbrella.
Mm-hmm.
What does that rule tell you about sunny days?
Well, it doesn't mention them.
Exactly.
Right.
The rule only dictates what happens when rain falls. It never, ever states that rain is the exclusive condition that requires an umbrella.
Oh.
What if she wants to use the umbrella as a parasol to block the harsh sun? What if she has a bad knee and wants to use it as a makeshift walking stick?
Oh, wow.
What if there's an aggressive dog on the street and she wants it for protection? Okay, I see it now. So because the rule didn't say she only takes an umbrella if it rains, denying the rain doesn't guarantee she won't take the umbrella for a completely different reason.
Precisely. You cannot definitively conclude not Q just because not P happened. That is the trap of denying the antecedent.
That is sneaky. Okay, what's the fourth form? I know this one is notorious for destroying students on exams.
It is the most common logical error human beings make. It's called affirming the consequent.
Affirming the consequent.
The flawed logic goes like this. If P, then Q. Q is true. Therefore, P must be true.
Let me try it. If it is raining, she takes an umbrella.
Yeah.
I see my wife standing in the hallway holding an umbrella. Therefore, it must be raining outside.
Invalid, for the exact same reason we just discussed.
Right. because she could be holding the umbrella to go use it as a walking stick. Seeing the result, Q doesn't guarantee the initial cause, P, was the trigger, because there could be a dozen other triggers.
You've got it. It is incredibly common to confuse modus ponens, which is valid, with affirming the consequent, which is invalid.
Why do we do this? Why is affirming the consequent such an easy trap to fall into?
It really comes down to how our brains naturally crave symmetry. We deeply want relationships to be bidirectional.
Like a two-way street.
Exactly. We want if A causes B to also mean if I see B, A must have happened. Our brains want to simplify the world. But in strict logic, and in the real physical world, causality is rarely a two-way street.
Right. If the street is wet, it might mean it rained, but it could also mean a street sweeper just drove by, or a fire hydrant burst. A wet street, the consequence, does not guarantee rain, the condition.
Exactly. And cognitive psychologists have devised a very specific, somewhat infamous experiment to prove just how terrible humans are at navigating this abstract conditional logic.
Yes, I know this one.
It is called the Wasson selection task.
The Wasson selection task. This is legendary in psychology circles. It was created by Peter Wasson in the 1960s, and I love this study because it really humbles you. It exposes how much we struggle when logic is stripped of context.
It is a brilliantly simple setup. I want you to imagine you are sitting across a table from me. I place 4 flat cards on the table in front of you.
Okay, 4 cards.
I explain the rules of the cards. Every single card has a letter printed on one side and a number printed on the other side.
Letter on one side, number on the back. Got it.
The 4 cards facing up on the table right now show an E, a K, a 4, and a 7.
E, K, 4, 7.
Now, I give you a specific rule about these cards. The rule is, if there is a vowel on one side of the card, then there's an even number on the other side.
Okay.
Your task is to tell me which cards you absolutely must turn over to test whether this rule is true or false. And here is the catch. You don't want to turn over any unnecessary cards. You only want to turn over the minimum number of cards required to rigorously test the rule.
Okay, if you are listening to this right now, I highly encourage you to pause the audio and actually think this through. Don't just wait for us to give you the answer. Formulate your own.
It's a great exercise.
The cards are E, K, 4, and 7. The rule is, if vowel, then even number. Which cards do you flip to test the rule? Take a second.
All right, you've locked in your answers. Let's analyze the typical human response. Historically, across decades of running this experiment, only about 4% of people get the logically correct answer on their first try.
4%. That is wildly low.
It is. The most common answer chosen by nearly 64% of people is to turn over the E and the 4.
Okay, let me put myself in the shoes of that 64%. I am definitely turning over the E. It's a vowel.
Right.
The rule says if there's a vowel, there must be an even number. So I have to turn over the E to make sure there's an even number on the back. If I turn it over and there's a 3 on the back, the rule is broken.
Your logic there is flawless. Turning over the E is an application of modus ponens. You are affirming the antecedent, finding a vowel, to check the consequent. The E is absolutely a correct card to flip.
Excellent. Now, for my second card. I'm looking at the rule. If vowel, then even number. I see a 4 on the table. 4 is an even number. I want to turn it over to see if there's a vowel behind it, because the rule mentions even numbers.
And right there, you have fallen into the trap. You just committed the logical fallacy of affirming the consequent.
Wait, walk me through that. Why is flipping the 4 a mistake?
Look closely at the exact phrasing of the rule. If there is a vowel, then there is an even number. Did the rule ever state if there is an even number, there must be a vowel?
No, it only dictated what happens when you start with a vowel.
Exactly. Just like the umbrella. The rule does not care what is on the back of an even number. You could turn over the 4 and find a K, a consonant. Does that break the rule?
No, because the rule never said consonants can't have even numbers.
Right. The rule only governs vowels. Therefore, turning over the 4 provides absolutely zero logical information. It is a wasted flip.
Mind blown. Okay, so if the 4 is useless, what is the actual second card I'm supposed to flip?
The mathematically correct answer is to flip the E and the 7.
The 7. But 7 is an odd number. The rule doesn't say anything about odd numbers.
That is exactly why you must flip it. This is the application of modus tollens denying the consequent.
Oh.
The rule says a vowel must be paired with an even number. The 7 is decidedly not an even number. What happens if you turn over that 7 and you find an E on the other side?
Oh, man. If there's an E behind the 7, then I have a vowel paired with an odd number. That completely shatters the rule.
Precisely. To test a hypothesis in strict logic, you don't just look for evidence that confirms it. You must actively search for evidence that would falsify it. The 7 is the only card on the table, other than the E, that has the potential to break the rule.
That is incredibly difficult to process in real time.
Yeah.
The abstract nature of the letters and numbers just creates this fog in the brain. I mean, a 4% success rate makes us look like we are cognitively deficient when it comes to logic.
But here is where cognitive psychology delivers a massive plot twist. And this is vital for understanding how the human mind actually evolved.
Okay, I love a plot twist.
In 1982, researchers Richard Griggs and James Cox looked at the dismal results of the Watson task and wondered, is the human brain truly bad at logic? Or is it just bad at abstract, contextless logic?
So they changed the parameters of the test.
They kept the exact same logical skeleton, the exact same modus ponens and modus tollens structure, but they changed the content from meaningless letters and numbers to a relatable, real-world scenario.
What did they do?
They presented participants with 4 cards again. This time, the visible sides of the cards read, drinking beer, drinking soda, 22 years old, and 14 years old.
Okay, replacing E, K, 4, and 7.
The new rule was, if a person is drinking beer, they must be older than 21. Again, the participant is asked, which cards must you turn over to ensure this rule is not being broken?
Well, when you frame it like that, it's effortless. I'm acting like a bouncer at a bar.
Right.
I see someone drinking beer, I absolutely have to turn that card over to check their age. And then I look at the 14 years old card, I absolutely have to turn that over to make sure they aren't drinking beer. I don't care what the 22 years old is drinking. They're legal. And I don't care how old the soda drinker is. Anyone can drink soda.
And just like that, you solved it perfectly. When the problem is framed this way, the success rate rockets from a miserable 4% up to a massive 73%.
But logically, it's the exact same puzzle. Beers is the vowel, the E, 14 years old is the odd number, the 7. It's the exact same structure.
It is identical. The 22 years old is the 4. You realize instinctively that checking the 22-year-old, which is affirming the consequent, is totally useless.
This raises a massive fundamental question about human cognition. Why are we logical geniuses when we're acting like bouncers at a bar, but we turn into logical toddlers when we're sitting in a math classroom looking at letters and numbers?
This specific discrepancy birthed a whole new perspective called the evolutionary approach to cognition. Evolutionary psychologists like Leda Cosmides and John Tooby looked at this data and argued that the human brain is not a general-purpose computer. It didn't evolve to solve abstract logic puzzles about symbols on a savanna because knowing the relationship between an E and a 4 provided absolutely zero survival advantage to our hunter-gatherer ancestors.
But knowing who is drinking the beer does.
Not the beer specifically, but what the beer represents, a social contract. Humans evolved to survive in highly complex, interdependent social groups. We relied on cooperation to live.
Right.
If I share the meat from my hunt with you today, you must share your gathered berries with me tomorrow. That is a social contract. If you take the benefit, you must pay the cost.
And if someone takes my meat but refuses to give me berries,
Yeah,
I'll starve.
exactly. Therefore, the single most critical cognitive skill for human survival was the ability to detect individuals who cheat the system. Evolutionary psychologists propose that we have dedicated, hardwired neural circuits specifically designed for cheater detection.
Oh, this is fascinating. So the beer and age puzzle isn't triggering our math logic circuits, it's triggering our cheater detection circuits.
Yes. The rule, if you drink beer, you must be over 21, is immediately recognized by the brain as a social contract. You get a benefit, alcohol, only if you meet a requirement, age.
Right.
The brain instantly looks for the cheater, the person taking the benefit without the requirement, which is the beer drinker, and the person who lacks the requirement but might be sneaking the benefit, the 14-year-old.
So it's not that we are cognitively broken, it's that our logic software is actually social survival software in disguise.
That's a great way to put it.
It requires a social context, specifically a scenario involving rules, permissions, or potential cheating to boot up and run properly. When you strip all that context away and just use E and 4, the software crashes. It doesn't know what to do with it.
It completely reframes our understanding of human rationality. We are highly rational beings, but our rationality is deeply domain-specific. It is custom-tailored to navigate the specific environmental and social pressures our ancient ancestors faced.
That is a profound paradigm shift. All right, let's take a mental breath.
Probably a good idea.
We've covered a massive amount of ground with deductive reasoning, syllogisms, validity, conditional logic, and the evolutionary brilliance of cheater detection. But as we established, deductive reasoning requires firm, established rules to work top-down.
Yes, it does.
Let's transition to the other side of the coin. What happens when we don't have established rules? What happens when we are just dropped into the world and have to figure things out from scratch?
That requires inductive reasoning. If deduction is top-down from general rules to specific conclusions, induction is bottom-up. You are starting with specific, isolated observations in your environment, and you are trying to synthesize them to form a broad, general conclusion.
It's the process of making educated guesses.
Precisely. And while deductive reasoning is the gold standard for mathematics and formal logic, inductive reasoning is how you actually navigate 99% of your life. When you assume a chair will hold your weight because every other chair you've sat in has held your weight, that's inductive reasoning.
Let's bring Nut back to illustrate this. Nut and his wife are in their garden in Germany. They see a black crow land on the fence. A few minutes later, another black crow.
Okay.
In fact, if Nut thinks about it, over his entire 40 years of life, every single crow he has ever laid eyes on has been black. Based on these thousands of specific, isolated observations, Nut makes an inductive leap. He formulates a general rule. All crows on Earth are black.
And this example highlights the defining critical feature of inductive reasoning that you must remember. An inductive conclusion is never 100% definitively guaranteed to be true.
Because it's an educated guess.
Right. With deductive logic, if the structure is valid and the premises are true, the conclusion is absolute. But with induction, Nut's conclusion that all crows are black is always vulnerable.
Right, because he hasn't seen every crow on Earth.
Exactly. There could be a rare genetic mutation causing an albino crow. There could be a unique species of white crow living on an isolated island Nut has never visited. Just because he hasn't seen one doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
So if we can't use the words valid or invalid to judge an inductive argument, because there's no mathematical certainty, how do cognitive psychologists measure them?
We evaluate inductive arguments based on probability. We classify them as either strong or weak.
Strong or weak?
A strong inductive argument means the conclusion is highly probable based on the evidence. A weak argument means the leap is too far or the evidence is too flimsy. And cognitive psychologists look at 3 specific factors to evaluate the strength of the evidence.
Let's walk through these 3 factors, because they are essentially the foundation of how we build knowledge. Factor number 1, the number of observations.
This is the most intuitive one. Sample size matters. If Nut sees 3 black crows and declares all crows are black, that is an incredibly weak inductive argument.
Yeah, obviously.
But if he observes 10,000 crows over a decade, his inductive argument becomes substantially stronger. The larger the pool of specific observations, the more confident the general conclusion.
Makes total sense. Factor number 2, representativeness.
This asks a vital question. How diverse is your pool of observations? Does your sample accurately reflect the entire category you are making a rule about?
So going back to Nut.
If Nut only ever observes crows in his specific 1 square mile neighborhood in Germany, his conclusion is still weak, even if he sees 10,000 of them.
Why? Because the environment is uniform.
Right. To build a strong inductive argument, his observations must be representative. He needs to observe crows in urban environments, rural environments, in Germany, in Australia, in Canada, in different climates.
If you only test a theory in one specific condition, you can't assume it applies everywhere. Which brings us to factor number 3, the quality of the evidence.
Not all observations are created equal. If Nut is just casually glancing out his window while sipping coffee, his evidence is weak. His vision might be obscured, he might mistake a raven for a crow, his memory might be faulty. But if a team of ornithologists captures thousands of crows, takes DNA samples, performs rigorous biological measurements, and documents the pigmentation scientifically, that is incredibly high-quality, strong evidence.
This sounds exactly like the scientific method.
It is the scientific method. The entire enterprise of empirical science relies fundamentally on inductive reasoning. Scientists observe specific phenomena in the world, gather massive amounts of high-quality representative data, and inductively infer general theories, like the theory of gravity or evolution, to explain them.
Oh.
But true scientists always acknowledge that their theories are probabilistic. They are extremely strong inductive conclusions, but they are always open to revision if new contradictory observations are made.
Okay, I want to pause here and make sure this is crystal clear for anyone taking notes. You need to know the fundamental difference between deduction and induction cold.
Absolutely essential.
Deduction is top-down. It moves from general rules to specific cases, and it deals in absolute certainty, valid or invalid. Induction is bottom-up. It moves from specific observations to general theories, and it deals entirely in probability, strong or weak.
A vital distinction. And here is the catch with inductive reasoning. Building a truly strong inductive argument gathering thousands of representative, high-quality observations is computationally exhausting. It takes massive amounts of time and cognitive energy.
And if there's one thing we know about the human brain, it's that it is a cognitive miser. It hates spending energy if it doesn't have to.
Precisely. In the real world, you don't have the time or the brain power to conduct a peer-reviewed scientific study every time you need to make an inductive guess about what to do next. You need to make fast decisions to survive.
So what does the brain do?
It relies on mental shortcuts. These shortcuts are called heuristics.
Heuristics. This is where human psychology gets really entertaining and honestly slightly terrifying. Because while these shortcuts evolved to keep us alive in a fast-paced world by giving us good enough answers, in our modern complex society, they lead to massive systematic errors in our judgment.
They lead to highly predictable cognitive illusions. Let's look at the first major heuristic your text covers, the availability heuristic.
The availability heuristic. The basic definition is that we judge how common, probable, or frequent an event is based entirely on how easily we can retrieve examples of it from our memory. If an example is highly available to our mind, we assume the event happens constantly.
Exactly. And your text highlights a classic 1978 study by Sarah Lichtenstein and her colleagues that demonstrates this beautifully. They asked participants to estimate the relative frequency of different causes of death in the United States.
Okay.
For example, they asked, what causes more deaths annually? Homicides and tornadoes or asthma?
If you ask someone on the street that question today, the vast majority of people will confidently answer that homicides and tornadoes kill far more people than asthma.
But statistically, objectively, that is completely false. Asthma causes significantly more deaths. So why is our inductive reasoning so wildly skewed?
It's the media environment. Think about it. When was the last time a local news station broke into their broadcast with a flashy red graphic to announce a tragic asthma attack?
Never.
Right? It doesn't happen. Asthma is private, quiet, and unfortunately mundane to the media. But a homicide, a devastating tornado ripping through a town, those are spectacular, highly emotional events. They are plastered across every news channel, shared endlessly on social media, and talked about by everyone.
Therefore, those spectacular events are highly encoded in your memory. When the researchers ask you to judge the probability of these deaths, your brain uses the availability heuristic. It searches its internal database.
And what does it find?
It instantly retrieves dozens of vivid, terrifying memories of homicides and tornadoes. It struggles to find even one memory of an asthma death. The heuristic does its quick calculation. Quote, I can easily remember tornadoes, therefore tornadoes must be incredibly common.
It substitutes a difficult statistical question, what are the national mortality rates? With a very easy memory question, what can I recall fastest?
Yes.
This is why people are absolutely terrified of getting eaten by a shark at the beach, but they don't think twice about driving 80 miles an hour down the highway while texting. The statistical danger is entirely backwards, but shark attacks are vivid and available, while car crashes are just background noise.
It is a profound vulnerability in our modern media landscape, where rare, spectacular events are artificially pumped into our minds constantly, completely warping our intuitive sense of probability.
All right, let's move to the second major shortcut, the representativeness heuristic.
This one is equally powerful. The representativeness heuristic occurs when we judge the probability of an event or a person belonging to a certain category based purely on how much they resemble our mental prototype, our stereotype of that category.
We completely ignore base rate statistics and just ask, does this look like the picture in my head?
Precisely. To illustrate this, we have to talk about arguably the most famous thought experiment in behavioral economics. This is the Linda the Feminist Bank Teller problem developed by Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman in 1983.
Well, this is a classic. Listeners, track this scenario carefully. We're going to introduce you to a fictional woman named Linda.
We tell the participants Linda is 31 years old, single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and she also actively participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations.
Okay, we have painted a very specific, very vivid narrative picture of who Linda is. Now, We asked the participants to judge which of the following two statements is statistically more probable.
Linda is a bank teller.
Linda is a bank teller, A&D. She's active in the feminist movement.
When presented with this choice, the overwhelming majority of people, even students trained in statistics, by the way, choose option B, they state it is more probable that she is a bank teller and a feminist.
And by choosing option B, they commit a massive cognitive error known as the conjunction fallacy.
It is a complete violation of the fundamental laws of mathematical probability.
Why?
Let's break down why. Every single person who exists in option B, feminist bank tellers, is automatically inherently included in option A, all bank tellers.
Option B is just a smaller subcategory inside option A.
Exactly. It is a conjunction of two traits. Mathematically, it is absolutely impossible for a specific subcategory to be larger or more probable than the broad encompassing category it belongs to.
I use a pizza analogy to try and explain this, because the word bank teller sometimes trips people up.
I love a good pizza analogy. Let's hear it.
Okay, imagine I describe a guy to you. I say he is 6'8", he weighs 250 pounds of solid muscle, he runs 10 miles a day, and he wears athletic gear constantly. Now I ask you, what is statistically more likely in the global population?
This guy is a person who loves pizza.
This guy is a professional NBA player, A&D. He loves pizza.
That analogy works perfectly.
Right, because people desperately want to pick option B. The description looks exactly like a professional athlete. He fits the prototype. But think about the raw math.
The math is unforgiving.
The group of all people on Earth who love pizza is hundreds of millions, maybe billions of people. The group of professional NBA players who love pizza is maybe 400 guys. By adding that second condition, whether it's athlete or feminist, you drastically shrink the mathematical probability.
But our brains are not natural statistical calculators. We are narrative creatures. Linda's description tells a story that perfectly aligns with the stereotype of a feminist activist. She doesn't fit the stereotype of a quiet, conservative bank teller.
So the representativeness heuristic completely overrides our basic logic.
Yes. We substitute the hard math question, which group is statistically larger, with an easy narrative question, which description sounds more like the Linda I just imagined?
We fall in love with the story and completely ignore the math, which is the absolute perfect bridge to our final topic today. We've spent this entire deep dive talking about reasoning, how we take in premises, form conclusions, and estimate probabilities using flawed shortcuts.
Right.
But reasoning is just the internal assembly line. Decision-making is what happens at the end of the line. It's what we actually do when we have to choose between alternatives.
Reasoning informs the decision, but the decision is the behavioral output. And just as with reasoning, psychologists study decision-making through three lenses.
Let's hear it.
The normative approach studies the purely rational ideal, how a perfect, emotionless computer would calculate maximum utility and choose the statistically optimal outcome every time.
Which we know humans don't do.
Right. Then there is the descriptive approach, which studies how humans actually choose, heavily influenced by our emotions, our heuristic shortcuts, and our biases. And finally, there is the prescriptive approach, which is the applied science of trying to bridge the gap-developing methods, algorithms, or nudges to train humans to make better, more normative choices.
So why do our descriptive, real-world choices deviate so wildly from the perfectly rational normative math?
A massive reason for this deviation is a phenomenon called the framing effect. The framing effect demonstrates that human choices can change completely based on how the exact same mathematical options are presented to us.
Presented like the wording.
Exactly. Specifically, our choices hinge on whether the options are framed in the language of gains or in the language of losses.
This concept is the bedrock of modern behavioral economics. To illustrate the framing effect, let's walk through the classic $300 versus $500 gamble experiment from your textbook. It requires participants to navigate two different scenarios.
All right, lead the way.
Okay, scenario A. Imagine you sit down at my table, and I just hand you $300 in cash. You are $300 richer.
I like this game already.
Right. Now, I give you a choice on how to proceed.
You can take a sure, guaranteed gain of another $100. You walk away with $400 in your pocket.
We flip a coin. It's a 50-50 chance. If it lands heads, you gain $200, walking away with $500. If it lands tails, you gain nothing more, walking away with your original $300. What do you choose?
When presented with scenario A, where the language is entirely focused on gains and keeping, the vast majority of human beings are predictably risk-averse.
They don't want to gamble.
No, they take the sure thing. They lock in the guaranteed $100 and walk away happy with $400.
That makes sense. A
Yeah.
bird in the hand. Right. Now let's look at scenario B. You sit down at my table, and this time I hand you $500 in cash. You're $500 richer.
Even better.
But now I give you a different choice.
You must accept a sure guaranteed loss of $100. I take $100 back, and you walk away with $400.
We flip a coin.
Yeah.
50-50 chance. Heads, you lose $200 walking away with $300. Tails, you lose absolutely nothing walking away with your full $500. What did you do?
In scenario B, where the exact same situation is framed entirely around the concept of a loss, human behavior drastically flips.
Oh, cool.
The majority of people suddenly become risk-seeking. They refuse the guaranteed loss of $100. They would rather roll the dice and gamble, desperately hoping the coin lands on tails so they can avoid the feeling of losing anything.
But hold on. Let's look at the actual normative math. In scenario A, the sure choice leaves you walking out the door with $400.
Yeah.
In scenario B, the sure choice leaves you walking out the door with $400.
Yep.
The mathematical end states are identical. The probabilities are identical. But just because I use the word gain in the first scenario and loss in the second, people change their behavior from safe to reckless.
To explain this irrationality, Kahneman and Tversky developed a Nobel Prize-winning framework called prospect theory. If you look at the graph in your textbook illustrating prospect theory, you'll see a very specific asymmetrical curve representing subjective value.
Asymmetrical.
Yes. What prospect theory mathematically proves is that human beings do not process equivalent gains and losses symmetrically.
It's the concept of loss aversion.
Exactly. The psychological pain you feel from losing $100 is significantly sharper, deeper, and more intense than the psychological joy you feel from gaining $100.
Losses just hurt more.
They do. Because losses hurt us so disproportionately, we become highly irrational when trying to avoid them. When a problem is framed as a gain, we play it safe to protect our win. But when it's framed as a loss, the pain is so aversive that we will take wild, reckless gambles just for the chance to avoid it.
And this isn't just a quirky phenomenon that happens in laboratory experiments with college students. This dictates the real world. Think about how marketers use this.
Oh, it's everywhere.
If you go to the grocery store to buy ground beef, the meat company will never label their package contains 25% fat. That is a loss frame. It makes you focus on the negative. Instead, they label the exact same meat 75% lean. That is a gain frame. The objective meat in the package hasn't changed by a single molecule, but consumer behavior changes drastically.
It applies to everything. Politicians will frame a tax policy as protecting the income you've earned, triggering loss aversion, rather than investing in community growth, a gain frame depending on how they want to manipulate the voters. Casinos force you to convert your cash into plastic chips because it removes the psychological loss frame of handing over actual money, allowing you to gamble more recklessly.
They are hacking our cognitive software. They manipulate our behavior by changing the frame without ever changing the underlying math. It is powerful and honestly a little unnerving to realize how easily our rational choices can be steered just by changing a few words.
It is the ultimate lesson of Chapter 10. Our cognitive landscape is messy, heavily biased, and easily manipulated by context.
All right. We have covered an immense amount of ground today. Let's do a strong recap to lock in the major takeaways of your journey through reasoning and decision-making. We started with the rigid, top-down world of deductive reasoning, exploring how categorical syllogisms work, how to map them with Euler circles, and the critical meat grinder difference between a structurally valid argument and a factually true premise.
We then explored the traps of conditional logic, the if-then statements, highlighting how easily our brains confuse the valid modus ponens with the incredibly tempting but invalid trap of affirming the consequent.
From there, we looked at the infamous Wasson selection task. We saw how terrible we are at abstract logic, but how brilliantly our evolutionary cheater detection software kicks in when the logic is framed as a social contract like drinking beer. Then we shifted gears to inductive reasoning, looking at how we build probabilistic bottom-up knowledge from specific clues and how we evaluate the strength of those guesses.
Because true induction is cognitively exhausting, we explored the brain's mental shortcuts, heuristics. We analyzed how the availability heuristic makes us fear tornadoes more than asthma based on media exposure, and how the representativeness heuristic seduces us into the conjunction fallacy with Linda the feminist bank teller.
And finally, we brought all of that processing to a head with decision-making. We revealed how the framing effect and the loss aversion principles of prospect theory prove that our fear of losing fundamentally reshapes the choices we make.
You have just absorbed a phenomenal overview of the cognitive mechanics that drive human behavior. But remember our disclaimer, this deep dive is a companion to your learning. You still need to dig into Chapter 10, review those Euler circle diagrams, study the asymmetrical curve of prospect theory, and complete your actual coursework to master this material for your exams.
As you close your textbook today, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to ponder. We talked extensively about the evolutionary approach. We learned that our cognitive hardware, our reasoning and decision-making machinery evolved primarily to solve real-world, face-to-face social survival problems on the ancient savanna, like detecting cheaters in a tribe.
Right.
So ask yourself, how well equipped do you think that ancient, deeply hardwired biological machinery actually is to handle the millions of abstract, algorithmically framed, probability-based decisions you are forced to make every single day while staring at a smartphone?
A fascinating, muddy landscape indeed.
Thanks for diving deep with us. Good luck with your studies, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Say that you must fly away. I guess it must be so.